Hello, hello, and welcome to the Leading and Learning Podcast, the podcast that highlights innovative, successful, and positive educational leadership. I'm Scott Jaworski, and joining me as co-host today is fellow school improvement specialist, Terrell Berry. Welcome back to the podcast, Terrell. How's it going?
I'm doing all right, Scott, man. How are you?
Doing great. Excited for this podcast. Excited for this episode. Today's episode is going to run a little bit different than usual, as you might have noticed. In honor of Black History Month, we have not one, not two, but three inspiring, successful African-American educational leaders joining us. And for the first time, the Leading and Learning Podcast is airing on both Apple Podcasts and the IDOE's YouTube channel. So if you want to put a face to the voice, go ahead and check us out on YouTube. Also, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a comment and rating. It really helps us out and lets us know if you like the content we're producing. Now, without any more delay, let's get to our guests. Joining us from Fishers Junior High in the HSE School District is Middle School Principal of the Year, Dr. Crystal Thorpe. So glad you could join us tonight, Dr. Thorpe.
Thank you, Scott, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Absolutely. Our second guest, the elementary principal of the year from Westlake Elementary School in the MSD of Wayne Township, Dr. Denisha Murph. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Murph. I hope you and your team at Westlake have stayed warm and safe this week.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here this evening.
So happy. And then also finally serving her fourth year as principal of Meredith Nicholson 96 Elementary from IPS, Dr. Michelle Jackson. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jackson. Very happy you could join us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with these great women.
Absolutely. Now, we chose our panel tonight to shine a light on inspirational Black leaders in hopes to learn more about them, their journey, and what we can do to inspire future leaders. So let's start with Dr. Thorpe. As I said before, you were recently named the 2020 Indiana Middle School Principal of the Year by the Indiana Association of School Principals. Would you mind sharing with us what inspired you to become a principal and what the award means to you?
Sure. So I started out as a teacher at Ben Davis High School. And when I was a teacher, I was actively involved in a lot of things. I had a dance group. I was a cheerleading coach. I did some videos for Doug Reeves about authentic assessment with writing. And so my principal saw some leadership traits in me and talked to me about possibly going into leadership. And so I went to Butler. I was a part of Butler's EPPSP program. I think I was in cohort number 13. I think they're probably at cohort 50 now, but way back in the day. And I was one of the youngest people in the cohort group. And so I finished my master's degree after teaching for only 4 years. And I remember applying for my first administrative position it was at Pike High School, actually, as a dean. And I got all the way to the final interview, had it in the bag. But one of the requirements was that you have to have 5 years of experience rather than the 4 that I'd had. And so it was like, thanks, but no thanks. And my heart was broken, but I love teaching, so it didn't really matter. So my first position was actually working for an amazing African-American woman named Helen Carter. She hired me after, I think I taught 8 years. She hired me as an assistant principal down at Southport Middle School. And I also worked with the amazing Alicia Ramsey. And so I think having my first position where I'm working with other Black women was such a magical experience for me because that just doesn't happen very often. And so I learned a lot from both the women. Well, Wayne Township, where I graduated from and where I got my first teaching position from, they called me back and said, hey, we have a position. Are you interested? And it was about $20,000 more. It was about 15 minutes less of a drive. And I applied and I got the position at Fulton Junior High School. So I was at Fulton, I think, for about 4 years. And then Fulton became Ben Davis's ninth grade center. And a friend of mine lived in Fishers, and she called me up one day and said, hey, there's a position out here. You should consider applying. And we kind of went back and forth because I was like, no, I don't think so. I enjoy working in Wayne Township. It was a challenge. I actually am from the Hallville area, grew up over there. So these are my people. And I really wanted to make a difference in their lives. And I just didn't feel like I was needed in an HSC, to be quite honest. And so I applied to Sand Creek Intermediate School, I think, had a position. I applied and I received the thanks but no thanks letter. And then I applied again for the Fishers Junior High School position and was shocked that I got called in for an interview. And after I interviewed, I learned that one of the assistant principals that I worked with in Wayne Township, his wife, who had also been an assistant superintendent in Wayne Township, they remembered me, and he spoke highly of me. And I had no idea when I was interviewing. I learned this later. And so, yeah, I got the position, the first African American principal in Hamilton County, I believe, but also in District 5 for IASP. And so when you ask, what is the significance of that? I am Black history in the making, and I love it. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity, because never in a million years would I thought a little Black girl who grew up for most of my life in Hallville could go on to Hamilton Southeastern and become principal of the year. So all I can do is thank my God that I've had the opportunity, and it's been a positive one.
That's a great story, and we're so thankful you agreed to join us tonight, because that's exactly the kind of story we wanted to share. Dr. Jackson, you became principal of Meredith Nicholson after a stint as the assistant principal for Shortridge High School. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us what the move from high school to elementary was like, and what inspired you to make that jump?
Absolutely. So my first experience was just with education in general. I was a Spanish teacher at Culver Academy for a year and actually graduated from there. And then from Culver, I went to Speedway High School as a Spanish teacher as well. So I've had all this experience, and I was there for 11 years. So I had all this experience at the high school level. And then I was like, okay, well, then I jumped over, was able to get my position in IPS at Shortridge High School, which was phenomenal, for 2 years. And so I was thinking, wow, I've had all this high school experience. I would really, really want to see what the trajectory of kids starting from pre-K all the way up to high school, because I do believe that having a well-rounded education only supports the kids that I'm with. So that was my main motivation for going to the elementary, but also Meredith Nicholson also had a very special place in my heart. After researching the school, I found out it was in my majority minority school, where most of the students were Hispanic, African, or African American. So I am bilingual, so I also speak Spanish. So not only was it was part of my passion to support students that are a lot of times, unfortunately, disadvantaged because of just some circumstances. It was nice to go into and start in supporting kids at a very young age, starting at 4 years old, and being able to see that trajectory all the way through high school. One of the things that I absolutely love is that I was able to see where they were going. And so starting at 4 years old, supporting them and seeing where I was going to, I've seen where the kids need to be. I also taught some, when I was at Speedway High School, I taught some dual credit classes. So just taking that knowledge of where kids need to go has supported my endeavor of going to a elementary school. It was definitely a learning curve. With the staff and the students and the parents, the level of care is tremendous, but I honestly believe it's made me a better educator just because of the experiences that has led me to know what it takes to make sure teachers are supporting the kids at that level to get to where they need to be and to be college and career ready.
That's fantastic. And that's actually going to segue into a question that I have for you later in the discussion. But I want to bring it back to Dr. Murph. As the elementary principal of the year, you've certainly put in plenty of time and showed dedication necessary to have success as a school leader. What motivates you to maintain the success you've achieved, and how does earning an award like that affect your mindset moving forward?
I would say that what motivates me the most is the fact that you have to keep children first and as you make decisions. At the heart of school, sometimes I think things get mixed up and the waters get muddied between, okay, does this work for staff and students, or does this work just for staff? And sometimes we tend to try to move closer to the staff perspective, because as principals, we don't want to take that heat. Like, you just don't. And so what I've had to do is know that it's going to be a battle at times and it's going to be hard. But when you show people the benefits that this has for children, that's what motivates me to keep going. We always make sure that I tell them at the heart of every decision I make, the kids have to be there. What is best for the children? Someone that I work with, Dr. Harris, she always asks, how are the children? And if you ask those questions, you really continue to be motivated to do the work that you do, because the work is hard. The work is very hard. It can take a toll you, your mind, your body, your soul. But if you keep those babies first and their little eyes and their future in perspective, that's what motivates me to keep on going. And as far as winning the award, it shows that there's room for everyone for real. Not just that, I call it lip service when they say things like, there's room for everyone. Anyone can, receive this award. And I know I go to the conference every year, and I very rarely see anybody from the districts, unless it's like Gary or East Chicago area, winning this award for their district. I have never seen anyone Black on the stage winning a state honor. And so to be able to win that award, as well as my wonderful cousin down there, that was huge. Both of us were on the stage. Like, I couldn't believe it. And we cracked a joke because at first when I won, it was like, well, wait a minute. Usually there's only room for one person to win. So, all shucks. And when they called her name, I stopped in my tracks and just started clapping and cheering. Because it was like, I kept saying, we won, we won. And all of my colleagues that showed up, I kept saying, people of color, we won. Because I really feel like this was something to share with everyone. Because there are so many people who work hard every single day. And they do right by their students. They push. They excel at what they do. And I really felt that this honor was for everyone. Now, of course, I was glad that my name was up there in my picture, of course. For sure.
Absolutely.
But it was there, and it was so powerful, and it was such a good day. And even in my building, we're still riding this out. Every meeting we have in Wayne Township before we get started, they'll say, and next, the 2020 Elementary Principal of the Year, Dr. Murph. Now, it was funny the first few times, but now I'm kind of like, okay. And then one of my colleagues said, you better enjoy this. We're doing this at the beginning of every meeting. So it is very motivating and inspiring, not just for the people around me, but people around the entire state.
Very deserving. And like Dr. Thorpe said, I mean, it is history in the making. And like I said, we are so grateful for you, all three of you, to join us tonight for our conversation.
They better not ever give me an award, because no one's going to ever hear the end of it. And Scott, you know me. Listen, just put that on my title going forward.
No way, man. No way. That would be the one reason I would stand on the table saying, we cannot give this man the award. He will never let anybody live this down. Well, let's go ahead and jump into our conversation. And again, I really do want to thank each of you for joining us on the Leading and Learning podcast, and for sharing your inspirations and motivations and a little bit of your backstory as school leaders. For the rest of the episode, we're going to really open up the dialogue. It is a panel after all, and we want to provide all of you with the opportunities to discuss and elaborate on some of the topics we have for you today. So I'll start by directing this question to Dr. Thorpe. We're going to focus on equity and curriculum. Teaching about equity, diversity, and inclusion is something that it's typically emphasized in February for Black History Month, but it really should be emphasized and embedded in our instruction and curriculum throughout the year. As we all know, equity isn't simply a racial matter. Equitable education is a right of all students from all different backgrounds across our state. So we'll start with this, Dr. Thorpe. How can instructional leaders support teachers in developing a more equitable and inclusive curriculum?
I think one of the ways that we can do this is that we have to start by having the teachers understand who they are and what they represent. So I'm in Hamilton Southeastern, and we've been on the news a lot for not necessarily the right things. When I first came to my school, I noticed that there were some issues there with my school had the largest socioeconomic population. We had the largest African-American population. And there were some very strong feelings about people not necessarily wanting to come to my school. And so one of the first things that I did, I hired an outside consultant, I think my first or second year, Dr. Roger Cleveland. And we hit the ground running, and we talk a lot about racial issues. I had a teacher tell me one time, I'm colorblind, so I don't see color. And I had to tell her, if you don't see color, you don't see me. And I am a Black woman, wonderfully and fearfully made in God's image. So even just starting with that, you have to lay the groundwork. And so we talk a lot about race. We talk a lot about racism. We talk a lot about disproportionality in discipline, in grades, in kids in high level courses. And so my staff knows that I have some high expectations when it comes to making sure that all of our kids get an equitable education. Now, it's a work in progress, but we chip away at it every day. So when you talk about instructional practices, I do ask questions. So why do we keep reading this book that is about African Americans, but it's from a deficit model and he's a drug dealer and and they'll come back and say, well, the author is a Black woman who won some award. I know, but we have to make sure that we're also showing joyful stories in our curriculum. Just the other day, one of my math teachers who is amazing shared with me a lesson using Desmos where we're going to have our students write research on African American mathematicians. Those are some things that I don't think people talk about much, but my goal is that this should be something that we do all the time, not just for Black History Month. So when we talk about bias, like we're reading a book right now, the book called Bias, because my teachers also let me know that sometimes when they walk outside the room, they forget about their privilege. And so I tell them that just lets me know that we have to keep working at it. And so just setting that expectations, talking about it, providing them with resources. Here are some great books to consider, to think about our library, making sure that we have books that represent all of our students, gay, straight, lesbian, everything, that's part of it. So I think as a principal, just pushing to where it's something that's natural, that when Black History Month rolls around, it's not something special.
So I have a follow-up to that. How do you, from a leadership perspective, right? How do you constantly try to build that commitment from your staff? Like, what is that process like? Because I think that's for a lot of our listeners, that's the hardest part, right? That initial conversation and then the whole commitment versus buy-in. So what advice, if any, would you have for that aspect?
I think you just cannot give up, and you talk to people. You find out what some of the issues are. So, for example, we're reading the book Biased, and some of my staff members are having a hard time because they feel like, well, I grew up poor. There's no big difference between being, my issues and a Black person's issues. So I found the article, I think it's called I teach the article, My Class Didn't Trump My Race by Robin DiAngelo. And in the article about her life, she talks about how she learned early on that there's a huge difference than from being poor and white, from being poor and Black. And she knew that her skin had currency. And so because I know that that's an issue that some of my staff members raised, we're going to read that article now, because it's like I have to keep digging deeper to get them to understand that equity does not mean equal. It means giving people what they need to be successful. And so if they're not quite there yet, I got to keep pushing. And that's what I do.
Dr. Jackson, what does that look like in your school? One of the research I did prior to this this panel was I want to look at what do the ethnic backgrounds of teachers and school leaders look like compared to the populations that they're serving. And I don't want to spoil the question I have down the road here, but how important is it that you really, like Dr. Thorpe said, really train your staff on how to actually engage and relate at some level to the students they're serving?
Absolutely, especially in my building where I have close to 400 students and we only have 2 white students. And the majority of my teachers are white. And I had the privilege of having Terrell actually come to my building and do a culturally responsive professional development. And from there, we have been really working really hard with our racial equity. We have a racial equity team, actually, that really supports this work. And it's something that we can't have happen, just like Dr. Thorpe said, it cannot happen just in the month of February, because we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So some of the work that we've been doing in our building is reading case studies on social justice issues by Gorski, and they've been actually phenomenal. With those case studies, we spend every staff meeting reading a case study, answering the questions, and going through a racial equity protocol. And it's a structured approach that helps people have really deep conversations. And that has really brought out to light some of our implicit biases, some of our thoughts of our kids. One of the things when I first got to the school, having history in the making of being those first African American leaders in the building, I can definitely understand that, because that was my history in my building. And these conversations never were brought up. So the first thing that we did was actually we did some research. It's actually on the DOE website, which is really great. It was a principal toolkit to see how well your building was ready to having these racial equity conversations. And we scored low. And because of that, I used that data to start having these conversations. And because sometimes, when I do have a predominantly white teaching staff, but all my support staff are either African American or Hispanic. So I needed to make sure I included my support staff in these conversations, because I also think my support staff give a wealth of knowledge to how they feel inside of a school building as well. So one of the things that we've done is, in my leadership team, I added my support staff into these meetings so they can have a voice in the conversations that we're having. Adding parents to these conversations and really including the parents as well. The parents have a lot to say and they want to say it. And also we do a panorama survey every year. And in that panorama survey, there is questions about race and equity. And we use that data to have conversations with our students so they can feel a little bit more, so they can feel comfortable with having the conversations as well. I'm really proud of IPS for adopting a Black Lives Matter resolution, and also having one of our strategic priorities is promoting racial equity. So when you say, how do you make the staff buy in? We first have to have a vision and a mission. And we have to uphold that vision and mission that we will promote racial equity within the building, and we will disrupt anything that would harm our students. So working in a building where the majority of my students are brown or Black, it's extremely important that they feel welcome, included, and there's high expectations, and parents are included. We're not accepting the fact that, these parents don't care. Our parents are very hardworking, they're involved, and I want to make sure that is not the mindset that our staff has. And we are really I'm pretty proud of our staff for working really hard on changing those mindsets and looking at their own biases. But it has to be something we do on a monthly basis, or even we think about it daily, obviously. But I can't just say, okay, we'll do this training one day and we never revisit it. It is something that has to happen consistently, because it's easy. Like Dr. Thorpe said, you walk out and you forget about your privilege. It's very easy to forget about that. So you have to constantly have to be faced with it. Another thing that we do, I've been doing this lately, because of all the things that are happening in our political climate right now. When there's something that happens in the news, I want to make sure our staff doesn't ignore it, because in the school, we are what the community is. So we have all our students come in. They're talking about this because they're talking about their dinner tables. So we want to give them a voice and a way to talk about it in school. But I also know I have to prepare my staff to have those conversations and make them feel comfortable having them, because the kids are going to bring it up. So in the morning when we start, if I've noticed there's something that has happened in the community, George Floyd or Black Lives Matter protests, when the Capitol was rioted, we have a stand-in meeting in the morning and start talking about, so if your kids start talking about this, how will you explain this? I make them start getting comfortable with each other and having the conversations before they go into the classroom. Because as we know, there are times that teachers might become uncomfortable and they ignore a situation, and it gets bigger and bigger and it grows. Then I'll have parent conversations coming and like, this happened at school. I want to make sure the kids have a structured environment to have a very good discourse, and here all voices are heard, and the teacher feels comfortable leading those conversations. So I lead that with my teachers.
Dr. Jackson brought up a really good point that I wanted to ask you, Dr. Murph. Engaging students and families in equity talks is also key to building that inclusive culture. It starts obviously as a principal, working with your staff, but that whatever happens at school eventually gets home, and that whether that's the conversations that teachers had with the students and the student then has with their parents or their family. So how would you engage the school community, especially the students and their families, in these challenging discussions?
Well, the most important thing is when you say what happens at school, goes home. And then more importantly, for what we like to say is what goes on at home comes into the school. Yeah. Especially in elementary, we like to think of it as this utopia and everything is perfect and there's rainbows and sunshine every single day. It is not. Like, they bring in the beliefs and the values and the experiences from their home into the school. And we cannot censor children and think they're not going to talk about this stuff. People would say, especially in the primary grades, well, they're too little for this. Like, we don't need to have those conversations. I'm like, listen to them on the playground. They are having these conversations, whether you want to or not. And so one thing that we've been very mindful of is to make sure that all of our students and all of our families know that when they walk into our school, we want them to feel valued, heard, and respected. Everyone wants to feel respect. They want to feel that their perspective is heard. And so as our school started to shift from a school that was, to me, when I first got there, was very top down. It's kind of whatever we say as a school, that's it. If we say this is the way it is, this is the way it is, there weren't very many discussions. And to just witness that, I knew I had to change that mindset as a new leader there. That was 14 years ago. When parents come in, they have a real issue and they need to be heard. We need to come up with a good solution that can meet the needs of that child, keeping that kid first. And it's not that as a teacher, we think this is best. We need to hear the parent. What is that parent saying to us? They know their kid way better than we will ever know their child. And that can be hard for us as practitioners because we went to school to be a teacher. Well, educating a child is deeper than just content. It involves so much more. You need to know each and every one of those kids at a very personal level to provide them with the equitable opportunities that they need to be successful. You need to hear the voice of that parent. We have to ask, and I always tell people too, if we mess up, we have to fix this. And that involves an apology and some action steps to correct the harm that we may have caused that child or that family. Because when they come into our schoolhouse, we need to be open to their ideas and to what they have to say. If we're not, then we're really not partnering with parents. And we love to put that in mission statements and our vision for our school, but we have to always check ourselves to say, do we really do that? Do we really listen to parents? Do we really take their suggestions into mind? If they're saying, well, at home, my kid is doing this, and our response is, well, I don't know what they're doing because at school they don't do it. We need to dig a little bit deeper. Maybe they have anxiety when they step into that building. Maybe they don't feel valued and heard. Maybe they are frightened because they aren't known at a personal level. And so for me, it's very important to get our parents into that conversation. We need to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable for the things that we find out from families that need to be fixed. And if we don't hold ourselves accountable, we're doing our families and our students a huge disservice. So for me, just to make it the environment that it needs to be, I really feel that as an educator, as a school leader, I need to empower my parents and show them how to advocate successfully for their child, no matter if they're in my building or somewhere else, because the school still is a system. And if we don't teach our families how to advocate for their child, then they feel like they're just spinning their wheels. And so even like in a case conference, I've told parents, you don't sign that paper right then. You take that home with you. You hold the power and the cards. You look at it. You call us if you have any questions or concerns, because we need you to know what you are really signing. We need you to be a valuable, important part of this process. And if you don't like the plan, then we're going to start over from scratch. And at first, when I got there, they would look at me in the case conference like, what in the world? Because they want you to sign it and pass it over. No, I want you to know you are your child's greatest advocate, and we need to empower you with the tools to make sure that they get what they need for success.
That's very important, I think, for everybody to hear. I think there are a lot of educators out there, both teachers and principals, who, when they face these social issues that arise in schools, and students are having conversations, and teachers are having to be put in these positions to actually, say what's right, say what should be said. I think it's important for us as leaders, as educational leaders, to be able to guide our teachers to have those conversations, like you were saying, Dr. Jackson, being able to have those conversations, whether it's doing something up front before school day after a major event happens, and just talking to them about here's how we're going to approach this as a school, as a school community. This is the way that we're going to handle this.
I think, to piggyback off of that, I think that part of that is we have to accept the fact that the reason we're here is because we've never had these conversations. I think that that's kind of the most important thing that we all need to understand is that, I mean, Scott, you've heard me say this, our most important job as educators is just to teach. And that's not always content. And like, we have to accept our responsibility and say, you know, the main goal for all of us, I think, is to leave the world better than what we found it. So what does that look like in our profession? And so I think that acknowledgement is that, hey, we've never had these conversations in the classroom is also part of the reason why we're here, right? Is because we've always pretended like these things didn't go on. And so I think that just accepting that nuisance, and I think to piggyback off of what you said, Dr. Murphy, is I think that one of the positives that I'm hoping we take away from COVID is that sense of shared responsibility, right, between teachers and parents, because I think every parent has become somewhat of a teacher in their own right. So I think that that's one of the things that we want to keep going. You know, obviously the hope is to get back to whatever normal school looks like, but I think that capitalizing on that sense of shared responsibility is huge right now.
Yeah, and one more thing too, it always comes up in conversations, and people will say, we can't have these conversations because that's political. We need to keep politics out of schools. And what I've empowered my staff is that's not political. That's their actual lived experiences. And so if you want to keep those two together, that's fine. But we have to have these conversations because no substantial learning can take place until our students are able to talk about these things that are bothering them, things that are on their mind. And they really want to know how they can make things better, even at a very elementary age. And if we let people opt out, or we let parents or staff members get upset and say, well, we can't do that, that's politics, we're really doing our students a huge disservice, because our goal is to help them develop that critical consciousness so we can make this world a better place where we want all of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to grow up together. And so I really hope people do keep that in mind as they listen, because we can't let that be the scapegoat any longer.
And I want to add too, is that oftentimes as a leader, you have to be bold in what you do, and you have to be able to stand on what you believe in. And so I remember when I first got my position, it's so funny, story I like to share. So when former President Barack Obama was campaigning, his people came to my school and they asked could they use our library, our media center, for a town hall meeting for Michelle. And at that time, we had been going through superintendents. I don't even know who it was, but I asked, could they use our facility? And they told me no. And, you know, some of my staff members were like, you know, don't you know, this is like Republican territory. You know, they're not very welcoming to Democrats. So I was heartbroken. But they came back and they gave me tickets to go see Michelle at the convention center. And I took my secretary and we had an amazing time. Fast forward, when he was president, my school was one of the only schools that actually showed his educational video. And I had other schools that were like, we're going to opt out. We're not going to show it. We're going to let kids sit out. And I'm like, he's the president. We had people actually wanting to wait and listen to what he had to say first before they showed the video. And it's like, no, we're not doing that. He is the president. He has a message for our kids and we're going to show it. And it's so funny because I did have a parent call me and he ripped me up one side and down the other, but he called the wrong school because he thought that my school didn't show it. And I'm like, sir, that's not us. We showed the video. So it's just, you have to be bold and believe in what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And even with that opposition, I totally agree. I think having these conversations can be very difficult. And also you have to have in your own self, like, okay, you know what? I know there's going to be some good that comes out of this because the kids that are in front of me are living these lived experiences every single day. And they can come in with trauma because of that. And so if they have trauma, they're coming in because they've seen something happen in their neighborhood or they see something on the TV and they're afraid and they're not really sure what to say about it. So as educators, they're expecting the teachers to have some type of knowledge behind it. Because honestly, that is what we've been called to do, is to also educate. So kids come wanting to talk about these conversations. And so teachers have to be prepared. And as leaders, we also have to prepare our teachers to have those conversations, because it wasn't in these. I teach in a building where I have a majority veteran staff. They're absolutely wonderful people, but some of these conversations were not in their teacher preparation courses. And so they have to constantly be learning these types of new best practices because they haven't been taught them in their teacher preparation classes. And so the old way doesn't always work now for our students now. And so it has to be constantly thought about and talked about.
I want to move on to our next topic, and that's going to be teacher recruitment, development, and retainment. And this actually goes back to a topic I touched on in the last question, actually. Data shows that there's a significant difference between the ethnic makeup of school districts' teacher populations and their student populations that they serve. So my question here, and this is for you, Dr. Jackson, to kick us off. What does the current applicant pool look like for educators, and what can we do to develop and retain our current minority educators?
Honestly, it's very low. And it's something that for me, I'm always looking for the best qualified person for the job, but I also know I have to make that net a lot wider. And so where are we looking? Where are we recruiting? What are these practices? And also, are we really authentically looking at the resume and making sure that we're looking for the people that are best fit for the position? I also know that we have to think about what opportunities keep our African-American educators, because they're African-American educators, but sometimes they leave the field. So what I've learned a lot of time is this has happened in my own experience that they want to be given opportunities for leadership and growth. And so making sure those opportunities are in that building, and they're also getting those they're getting those interviews, because we know that there are some unfair hiring practices. So I'm excited that being an African American leader, I can look at resumes and don't have to have someone else filter through them, and it doesn't go somewhere else. And so I really look at those applicants and bring them in and have those conversations to see what they really, really want to start diversifying my staff. But I also think that the biggest piece is making sure you are widening your net as much as possible, because you should recruit everywhere. I think Indianapolis is a great place to live, but you also have to recruit outside of Indianapolis if you're not finding it. Are we going to college and universities? What are the incentives to go into teacher programs at colleges? I think sometimes we think about the pay, we don't want to go into becoming teachers and things like that because of the pay. How are we incentivizing being in our educational system? So it's definitely a systematic thing. And I think that's when we start breaking the barriers of why we have such a low turnout for minorities in public education. But I also believe that they are out there. It just is a little bit more to seek and to find.
Dr. Thorpe, what does that look like? What does the applicant pool look like in HSE?
It's not very good, to be honest. And I know in my particular building, I've had quite a few African Americans come through my building. But I have a teaching staff that's probably, our average age is about 46, 47. So my people don't leave. And so it's been really hard for me to bring in more people to replace. But I think Dr. Jackson, she said a lot. It's tough right now because I think a lot of people, regardless of race, are just not going into the field of education. And I think the system that we have right now does not make it very welcoming, does not make it very accommodating. And I think that that's probably the biggest issue. We're going to connect test scores to pay, and we don't have the steps for pay. And it's hard. And honestly, I have a hard time talking people into it when I just am concerned about how it's going right now. I do know that we have to be very aggressive when we are recruiting. I remember back in the day when I was in Wayne Township, we would send principals out and to the different colleges. And I remember walking through the place one day, and I had several people begging me to come work for them. And I'm like, wait, I'm a recruiter. What are you talking? Leave me alone. But they were very intentional about, we want you to come work for us. And so I think everybody wants to feel wanted, wants to feel, needed. But I think most importantly, when you do have a group of African-American teachers or people of color is you have to create affinity groups to allow them to talk about some of the issues, because their issues are not going to be the same as their white colleagues. And so this goes back. People don't know, Danish and I, we have history. So we were both administrators in Wayne Township, and we had a cohort of about 6, 7, 8 women, and we would get together and we would talk about our issues. And it was so awesome to be able to just share and learn and grow from each other, because what we found out was that we had some things in common, and some of the things that Denisha shared with me helped me be a better, assistant principal myself. So you have to have people, or allow people to have groups to talk about some of the issues, and not just put them in a situation where it's just one of them or two of them. It's hard.
So I want to follow up with this question then, for you, Dr. Murph. How can we encourage more students, particularly those of color, to consider and explore education as a potential career to study and pursue?
Well, I always say that you can't be what you can't see. When I do workshops, that's part of what I discuss. And in my building, I am fortunate enough, I've been there 14 years, but we have a very diverse staff. But that has taken a lot of work and intentionality. So in every grade level, there are 1 or 2 teachers of color out of 4 or 5 sections. In one grade level, 3 out of the 5 are people of color. But that took a lot of work. I'm talking sorority recruitment, for asking people in fraternities, from the Divine Nine, talking to HBCUs. But what I found was most successful is that the teachers of color in my building, they were telling other people, this is a place where you would want to work. You have the support that you need from administration. You have what you need to be successful. If people in the building are causing issues with microaggressions, you can go to the boss, which would be me, and she will take care of it and address it. And people need to feel that support, because as Dr. Thorpe said, people want to recruit, but they don't want to do the steps necessary to retain those teachers of color, because that's a lot more work to retain them and to keep them and make them feel welcome. And so for me, when I think about students and how we get them to do that, is we make sure that they can see a face that looks like them, that is an educator. We have more kids now saying they want to be teachers and a principal than we've ever had in the last 10 years, probably. I think when you talk about that and you give the kids the opportunity to see what is a possibility, and not just talk about the pay or talk about what all you have to do to be a teacher, but to see the love that teacher has for that position, to see how the teaching practices do include them. Like we said, it's not just Black History Month. They see themselves in the curriculum, the instruction, and the assessment practices. That is what makes our kiddos want to be teachers. Now, they're elementary, so maybe when they get to college, they may decide, no, I'm going to be a software engineer. But for right now, we have more kids that do want to be educators. But I truly believe that's because that's what they see in the building.
And I think along with what Dr. Murphy shared, so your high schools too. I know there's been talk about, cadet teaching and things like that. I think that is an excellent place to start if we want to recruit the next generation of teachers, have them do the cadet teaching, provide them with some scholarship money to actually go into education. If we're serious about this, I think that's where we need to start.
Yeah, I would add that, especially being in high school, been in the high schools for so long, I was fortunate, I graduated from Butler as well. I was fortunate to be able to, when I was at Speedway High School, to have a tutoring group that was mostly all African-American students that would come to Speedway to actually do some of the tutoring at the beginning times of my years there. And having African-American students tutor other students was also very successful, because I was like, oh, wow, this is really great. I really enjoy working with kids, and actually seeing them as teachers also supported their endeavors to be teachers. So high schools, going into high schools and looking at some of those career tracks where they can do internships, it has to start at a very young age. I mean, like you said, we can start at elementary, we can go to middle, we can go to high. But I think planting those seeds for teaching careers is also very, very important. And I also think the history of our, I think about my mother. My mother grew up in the South Side of Chicago, and she said from her elementary years all the way up to high school, she never had a white teacher. So it was interesting that in that time where she grew up, she only had African-American teachers. So we have a huge history of African-American teachers. that has changed considerably. And I think going back to those principles of, having those African American teachers supported other African American people to become teachers. So seeing our faces as role models is one of the best ways that we can recruit. But I also go back to making sure there are fair hiring practices, because you can't get in somewhere if the door is completely shut. So we have to make sure those doors are open.
And to add to that as well, sometimes when those panel interviews take place, those big group interviews where you go round robin, in my building, making sure that people understand that we're looking for people that are going to be beneficial to the students that we serve. So if we know that we have 5 candidates and 2 of them are teachers of color, and you had a teacher of color who was fantastic, if you are dealing with a team that's like, oh, well, she might not fit in, or I don't know, I didn't really connect with her. Well, you probably didn't connect with her, but we're not looking for who you connected with. We're looking for who can be an effective practitioner and who can meet the needs of our school. So in the very beginning, I had to shut that down quite a bit about, well, okay, if you connected with her, but she barely answered any of the questions, that's not what we're looking for as an educator. We're looking for someone who is knowledgeable, who has a passion for teaching and learning, who is passionate about the students that we serve. That's what we're looking for. And that happens to be a Black candidate or a Latino candidate or an Asian candidate. That's what we need to look for. And that was a shift for them, because they kind of had that notion of, if I connected with her, she's going to be a great person to hire for our school. And our school had changed so drastically that couldn't happen anymore. And so it did cause some, ruffle some feathers in the very beginning. But I knew in my heart this was the right thing to do, to make sure our students were able to get the best folks in front of them who also had diversity of faces.
And I just want to add, from my dissertation, kind of like with what everybody is saying, one of the quotes that I used to start off my lit review was, I'm not asking you to hire me because I'm Black. I'm asking you not to exclude me because I'm Black. And that's what you have to go into it with.
I want to go back to a point that Dr. Murph made about, it's not just about recruiting, minorities into our educational system. It's also about, how do we retain them? How do we develop them and develop them as leaders? And that leads me into my final topic for today, which is developing instructional leadership. And I want to throw this back to you, Dr. Thorpe. What do you wish you had more experience or training on regarding your role as an instructional leader in the building?
You know what, Scott? Coming from Wayne Township all those years ago, I was so prepared, and Dr. Murph can speak to it as well. Back in the day, every hot practitioner, we had PD for principals. And so who were some of the people, like way back in the day? Larry Lazat, Doug Reeves, who else? Who do we have?
Marzano. We had everybody. Ainsworth. It was
a lot. And
good
so
stuff.
Excellent. So when I went into my role, and I tell people I don't know everything, but I know a little bit about a lot of things to be dangerous, and so I'm constantly learning, seeking, growing, trying to develop. But for me, what I look to my building leaders, my instructional leaders. And so I like to grow my people. And so if there are awesome things happening in my building, I tap on my building experts to not only teach the others in the building, but to also teach me. So for example, my science teachers are amazing at inquiry-based instruction. And so they've provided inquiry-based instruction to my entire staff, project-based learning with our social studies department, effective reading practices. We were doing Probst and Beers. I had my language arts department. So I tap on my leaders, and if I see something that's amazing, I will share it with them and have them grow and develop and have them present it as well. So I think for me, I had a strong foundation. I'm constantly learning, trying to get better, but I also tap on my building leaders to help them grow and become leaders themselves and just help our overall school grow and be better.
So Dr. Dorp, I just want to put a pin in this, Scott, and you'll know why. So you're saying that you were very prepared as a leader because in Wayne Township, there was a huge investment in leaders and principals?
Absolutely. So much so that it was like, oh, not another night of this. Oh my gosh, I want to go home. I mean, we did book studies, like I said, Denisha, we right there, where we go, the country club, somewhere over in Wayne-Town, celebrations or something. And we would be there for sometimes 3 hours at night, and they invested in their principals. And so, yeah, when and I remember meeting with the then superintendent that hired me in HSC, and she talked about that because, I'm rattling off names and stuff, kind of surprising myself, but it was because that's what we did. And then they also had their principals. We also had various roles to do. So we also participated in curriculum instruction. I think I was on the one for maybe language arts and foreign world language or something. Denisha, help me out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, same thing. Those curriculum teams. We all had curriculum committee assignments. Yep. With responsibilities. Yep.
Yeah. I would just add, I think, I'm glad you mentioned that, Dr. Thorpe. Some of the things that has worked really best with us is having instructional rounds where we're going out to other buildings and seeing what best practices that other buildings have and bringing that back to our own building. And also just doing instructional rounds with our leadership team in the building as well. I think collaborating with principals has been one of the best things for me, and having those instructions, because you're going to learn every day. You're learning from your colleagues, you're learning from the kids, and sometimes it's actually just talking to the kids too. I think we sometimes ignore how much the kids bring. We talk a lot of times about what the kids don't have, but we think, what are they bringing to the table? So I think going to instructional rounds and not really watching what the teacher is doing, looking at what the kids are doing has been huge in saying, okay, how are they grasping the concepts that are being taught? So that has been a big shift in my own mindset when actually just doing observations in the classroom and going out to other buildings, is watching the kids and not watching the teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And to add to that, what I have found to be so impactful is just giving your building level leaders the opportunity to try some things. Take a risk. Do you want to lead a book study? Do you want to go in here and do a peer observation with debriefing? Do you want to mentor this person? Would you mind sharing the great things that you've done in your classroom when it comes to your writer's workshop, for example? One teacher, she's phenomenal. When we first began our culturally responsive practices journey, she was like a superstar, but people didn't know that because she just did what she did every day in her classroom. And so to give her that opportunity just to show some of her practices has been monumental. And I think one thing that we sometimes don't always get in the instructional leadership part of our courses is that power of diverse perspectives, because I can give you the parameters of we need to teach these things, but you can put your own flair to how you get there, and respecting the different avenues people take to get to that end journey, but being willing to share. And as the leader saying, okay, when I go in and model, because one thing that I would do was go in to model lessons for people. If we tried something new, there is power in them seeing their leader model that practice. And then talking to them, this is the way I did it, but talk to me about how you think you would do this in your own classroom. Letting them do those peer observations and debriefing sessions, going in, do laboratory classroom opportunities. Those things make a difference. And then people know that there is so much building level capacity that we don't need lots of experts from the outside to come in. We're able to really capitalize on the strengths that we have here because we have phenomenal people in this building. And for them to hear me say that, but then see me actually follow through in my actions, it makes a huge difference as the instructional leader. And even like case in point with virtual, with virtual learning, that was hard for people. Mm-hmm. But what we had to say was, we're going to give you all these resources, all these tools, and a whole bunch of support. Like, we're not going to come in and do an observation on you after week 2 of virtual learning. But to see them shine and to watch different people use different tools to engage students, and then being able to share, hey, I saw such and such in her classroom. She tried this. Why don't you go talk to her about how she set that up? And then they were like, oh my gosh, that was wonderful. I never tried it before, but it was great. Just giving them that type of grace to be the expert that we know that they can be, even in virtual teaching times.
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Murphy, I think I was going to say that. It's when you mentioned actually going into the classroom, as a leader, we have that opportunity to go to every single classroom. And that's been a really push of mine, to making sure that we are showcasing those leaders in the building and also shouting them out when it's time to shout them out for things that they are doing really, really well. Because that just makes the culture of your building positive. Because right now it is really tough during COVID, teaching virtual, never knowing you're going to be remote, if you're going to be in person, are you hybrid? It's really, really tough. But there are some positives. And the one positive is the virtual learning and those recorded lessons. And so having recorded lessons that people can go back to and see and take those really small snippets and like, oh, I think I could probably do this in my class, has been really great. And the last thing I would say would be, you had also mentioned about just building that capacity in the building. I think professional learning communities, having that common planning time and having the time for teachers to have PLCs and to talk about those conversations is probably one of the best practices in education by far. Is because we have to communicate, and we have to communicate daily, and using that data to inform every single decision that we make, because then we're making informed decisions. So being an instructional leader is also building capacity with your staff and looking at the data to make those really big changes. So I enjoy this conversation. Just listening to you guys, I've actually learned so much and going to bring that back. So I always feel like education, we're always stealing best practices. So I think that is something that we continue to do, is to find what it works best. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. We try something different. We don't have to stick with something that is not working. So work with what you have and do the best. Stick with it for a little bit just to make sure you've given it your all. But we are working in a society where things are changing daily, and we have to also change our practices to make sure things are going well for our kids.
And I just wanted to add a little bit about what everybody said. I think it's really important for that capacity building, because that helps build a strong school climate and culture, and giving people permission to take risk, catching them when they fall, being there to give them everything that they need to be successful. One of my teachers, again, she's amazing, and she's infused math with civics education. She was so good at it that somehow information got out. She was featured in Newsweek magazine, Ed Weekly magazine. As a result of Ed Weekly magazine, our school is now going to be featured in it's a documentary about math instruction and how we've transformed math instruction, where our kids are actually seeing it in action. And that came from us having those conversations and just really pushing her to be her best self and giving her everything that she needed so that our kids could be amazing. And she rocks it out. Our kids that are in remediation math, take an I-STEP, they score 100%. Because she's making them see math, what it looks like, feeling it, touching it in their real life, and all of this other stuff has happened as a result. And man, it feels good in a building when you have people that are just amazing like that, and you tell them you appreciate them.
This conversation has been fantastic, and I'm so thankful again for all of you joining us. Before we let you go, would each of you mind sharing one piece of advice you would give to a new or aspiring school leader? And I want to start with you, Dr. Murph. What was the one piece of advice you would give them?
Well, I would share with them my favorite quote: if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Because sometimes as a new leader, people really doubt themselves and they hesitate to share their ideas. And what they have to understand is you are new to this position. You have some of the freshest, up-to-date information that we should all take a look at and listen. You have a new way of looking at things. You look at it from a different lens right now. Don't let people tell you that the ideas that you have are not valuable. Make sure that you really, really, really take care of yourself. I started off and I was answering emails at 2:00 in the morning. I'm checking this and checking that. That is not sustainable as a leader, because everyone is depending on you for everything. You have to make sure that you invest in that self-care. It's a big catchphrase now, but it is real, because the weight on your mind, like I said, your mind, your body, and your soul, it can really bring you down because you want to meet everyone's needs and do everything you can for everybody else. So that advice is to remember that your ideas deserve to be shared. Do not suffer from imposter syndrome when you get your seat at the table. Share your ideas and be willing to listen to different feedback, but don't hesitate and just sit there quietly. And then just make sure that you take care of yourself. Because I always say that if something happens to you, trust and believe, this sounds a little morbid, they're going to find somebody to fill that position. And that's just real talk. You have to find a balance, and that involves you using leaders in your building. And make sure if you have a family that you make time for your family and your friends so that you can keep a nice sense of balance in your life.
Dr. Jackson?
I would definitely agree with her, with Dr. Murph. But one of the things that first you have to become the leader and actually get the position. So one of the things I would say is I was told no several times. Don't give up on being told no. Keep on going. And this is a quote from my dad. There's a lot of things that happen in a building every single day, that happens with the school community, that happens at the district, that happens everywhere. One of the things that I always told myself, my dad always said, don't let anybody take your smile away. Because at the end of the day, your smile and your passion is why you were doing what you were doing. And also another piece of advice that I would give is something he also told me, as we were just in general, there's going to be a lot of information you hear, a lot of information. I believe that every experience, no matter good or bad, is an experience that you can learn from. So anything that comes my way, I say, eat the meat, spit out the bones. And that is something that has lived within it. And I can actually apply it to anything. Eat the meat, spit out the bones, because when you're in a staff meeting, or if you're working with a parent, or you're having a very difficult situation, there is something in that situation that will support you in some type of way. But there's also something that can tear you down. So you spit that out and you eat the meat. So it's just something that has always been how I've really lived my life with, because there's always something that's going to come at you especially when you're a school leader, as an educator, and as someone that is really caring for children, and you're very passionate about it. So it might seem simple, but it's something that I live by. Don't let anybody take my smile away, and also eat the meat, spit out the bones.
Dr. Thorpe?
I think everything that's been said has been well said. The only thing that I would add is don't sell yourself short. Be willing to be open to other opportunities. I know for me, I had a passion for the kids that I served in my community. But what I've learned being in Hamilton Southeastern is that all kids need to see people who look like us in those positions. So there's a finite number of positions, but hey, don't think that it's not for you, because there's your space. There's a place for you, and keep trying. Don't give up. You might get some no's, but when you get that yes, go out there and make the difference that you were supposed to do. So try new things, try new areas, grow.
Well, I want to thank you all again for your time and for your words of wisdom. Again, if you would like to reach out to Dr. Thorpe, Dr. Jackson, or Dr. Murph, we will be sharing their information with you. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this episode of Leading and Learning. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating. If you have any questions or suggestions for future guests or questions for Terrell or myself, you can find us at tberry_IDOE and at Scott_Jaws. Contact information for our guests, again, will be located in this episode's description. Don't forget to use the hashtag Leading and Learning in your tweets. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Big thank you to our technical supports, Brian Paul and Don Gilroy. Keep an eye out for Sarah's Pod Light episodes on Apple Podcasts. For Terrell, I'm Scott Jaworski, and remember to keep the focus on leading and learning.